Sydney Wanderers, John Tsatsimas, CEO of Sydney FC, Danny Townsend, from Football New South Wales, Peter Hugg, and from the FFA, Mark Falvo, who we've heard from already in this forum, plus the head of the Hyundai A-League, Greg O'Rourke. Please welcome them all as they come up to the stage. Is there a collective noun for football men on the stage? A pen? A pen of football administrators. Good to see you guys. We've added an extra chair, so we should have just enough room. Don't fall off the end there, Greg. Let's throw out a generic question first of all. As we say, you're all males in key positions of decision making within your organisations. So what is your commitment to women's football, your individual philosophy on this? We'll go down the line. John, start with you.
I think it's intrinsic that we need to ensure that we are frontiers in terms of carrying the message of women's participation in sport. And our philosophy is simple, but it's been there from the start. Simply stated is we set out to make sure that when we started the club, females were fundamental to what we were doing. So when we started the A-League, for example, and a number of people in this room assist in that regard, the W League had to be part of what we were doing. So it was a community project. It was one that was based on males, females, boys and girls being involved and all carrying the same message that being a community club, we could not leave females behind because that would be nothing to be contradictory to what we were supposed to do. So we've done that. And at the time that we did set up the A-League and the W League, it's important to note that, no disrespect to another club in Melbourne City or Melbourne Heart at the time, they did not have a women's team, and that only came in, I think 3 years ago. Katie, is that right? 3 years ago? So within a space of 3 months, we had to get an A-League side, an NYL side, and a W League side. And it was important that we did that properly as best as we could. Obviously, there were shortcomings in a short period of time, but hopefully we were involved. And that extends also to our office. Our administrative staff is 50% female. It's not only limited to people on the field, it's also the administration of opportunities for females to progress within our sport and administrative positions of importance there. So, and make a difference there. So we're very proud of what we've done. We just scratched the surface. We've increased all our women clinics and girls clinics, and we'll continue to do that. We'll do some great stuff with our Western Sydney Mini and other partners in terms of our mentoring program, which I'll touch upon a bit later.
Danny, congratulations on your new role incidentally, CEO of Sydney FC. It might be a difficult question for you to answer given you've only been there a few weeks, but I'm sure you'll give it a crack.
Yeah, thanks Simon. Well, I've got 2 girls, so that's probably qualifies me to comment in some regard. But look, I think from a personal standpoint, I've been abroad for the last 14 years and the last 5 of those in the US, and seen how the women's game there has really progressed, and obviously the success of the US women's team has been there to see, and Matilda's performances recently have highlighted what an opportunity we have here in this country to do the same. The US system is by no means there yet from a women's standpoint, but I think what we've got at our feet here in football is very unique. When I look around the other codes and I look at what the AFL have done with their WAFL, really a professional women's AFL player can play for Collingwood. That's pretty much as far as they can go. I think what the opportunity we have is that we can start a grassroots club in women's football or girls football in this country, go all the way through to an A-League club or a W League club as they're known, and ultimately end up playing for Matildas in Asian Cups and World Cups. So the pathway that women have in this game is far better than any other of our competitors. So we have a huge opportunity to get in touch with that grassroots female participation base and bring them along on that professional journey. So, again, as a father of two daughters, I would love to see them take that pathway. If Jerry Gomez over there is their coach, if he can get his act together and do a better job, they might get there. It'll be a great job, Jerry. But I think there is a huge opportunity, and with one that if we don't grab with both hands, we'll really do an injustice to the code and to the gender.
Mark Falvo from the FFA, David Gallup is a signatory to the Male Champions of Change. Is your name on that list as well?
It's not. I think I don't know why not. I think it's just the CEO, maybe the organisation that has that privilege. But I mean, I don't think you need to be signed up to the Male Champions for Change to be a male champion for change. And I certainly try to be in the the way that I conduct myself at FFA. I don't know. I mean, to go back to your question, what's the sort of personal philosophy on it? I don't know if it's something that's emerged, as I've become a father and have my own, now 9-year-old daughter, and I look at her and I see, why can't she have all the opportunities that my 6-year-old son could have to play the game and support a team and to aspire to represent their country. I don't know if it's also just because of the trends in society that this has now become an issue that's been obviously one that's there's been a gap that's existed forever, but it's a matter that's been thrust into the public and political consciousness that's being dealt with in a very public way and discussed and debated every day of the week now. So I think that's another kind of call to action and a challenge to make sure that we as a game are doing our bit to address what isn't quite right in society. And I think football can address that in quite a unique way because more than any other sport, it is accessible. It is a sport for all. You can play it if you're young, old, male, female, thin, larger. So we should never be a game that seeks to differentiate or discriminate. And I think it's to our own game that we not do that we address any form of gender divide because we are a challenger brand in this country. We've come a long way, but there remains a huge upside. Part of how we realise that upside is to attract more women to the game, to have more women, more girls playing the game, to have more mothers choose football for their daughter or their son, for that matter. So I think that's what drives me, and I'm privileged enough to be in a position where I can make a difference. And I think it's kind of conditioning what I do, and even how I spend my time, knowing that there is that opportunity there and that it's worth pursuing.
Peter, you have a daughter involved in football as well, given your previous role with the former Australian Women's National Soccer Association, that's what it was called. So this is a gimme question for you.
My daughter was born in December '94, and I took the job of Chief Executive of Australian Women's Soccer in January, February of '95. And looking back, it was 100% related to this thing that changes your life forever. Both Denny and Mark mentioned parenthood and so on. As an individual, married, whatever, you might be fairly selfish, you partner up and you think about your other, but once you become a parent, your whole focus changes. You're talking about your children in the future, you're worried about the environment, nuclear disarmament, whatever, education and so on. And being a football administrator at the time, it was a culture that I wanted my daughter to grow up in, playing in, etc., etc. And it was only a couple of months after accepting the job and qualified for the Suite 95. One of my biggest arguments, and I've had many, but one achievement that I would be in my top 5, and I can recall it literally as if it was yesterday, was with both the Australian Soccer Federation and Adidas at the time. The national team was sponsored by Royce or Graham or some ASICs at the time, etc. And we said, no, this is a national soccer team. They go away with the same strip. It was Adidas at the time, and we took on the ASF, and Jimmy Tansey was the Adidas rep, former Socceroo and high player, etc. And I think it's fair to say that since that time, both men's and women's football teams, national teams, have worn the same strip, whether it be Adidas or Nike. I'm conscious of Olympics and World Cups, and I put that, and I recall discussions, arguments, robust arguments with the likes of Tony Sage, to say this is a Perth Glory team, and it's inappropriate and wrong that a member federation such as Football West should be running it, and it was entirely appropriate that Perth Glory take on responsibility, which I'm pleased to say that I think all of the A-League clubs have now.
I'd imagine that was an interesting negotiation with Tony Sage.
Every discussion is interesting. I've been chatting rules here. I've been very fortunate, and I think the thing about privilege, it's usually visible to those who have it. And when you're in a position of power, authority, decision making, you have a responsibility to bring about change, and responsibility is not opportunity. And there's a great quote going around at the moment I think it's attributed to Kevin Spacey, and it says something like, if you're lucky enough to make it to the top, it's your job to send the elevator back down. And so one of my personal hobbies, if that's the right word, is mentoring, and I've had the good fortune to mentor a number of Matildas, one of which is Catherine Gill, and I see in Catherine an ex-Matilda player who is a future CEO, and I think what she's done with PFA her work is fantastic. I'm extremely proud of Catherine and where she's come from. I've done a lot of work with Heather. I've signed up to the Wanderers program to mentor, and I'm currently a mentor of one of the current Matilda squad. And so I see my job in the last stint of my career is to develop future administrators in any way I can.
So no pressure, Katie, future CEO. We'll hear from Katie shortly. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Like the others, I have the privilege of being a father to 3 daughters. Those daughters are now in their 20-somethings and have playing football, still playing football, and started playing football when they were 5 or 6. And I think I brought those girls up with my wife to challenge everything and to be whatever they could be. And sometimes with my eldest, I sort of regret a little bit of that, but she still challenges me to this day. But a bit to what Peter said about if you're in a position to do so, right? I don't think it's just about if you're in a position to facilitate change, if you're in a position to enable things that are there. I think if you are fortunate enough to be in a position to influence, then you need to create those change opportunities, right? and drive them. So from a young age, when my daughters signed up, which could be 25 years ago or 23 years ago, there was no girls at the club that I was playing with, right? And I had a 6-year-old who then played with all the boys, and she was, the story's been told by even the Matildas, right? That she was the only girl playing with boys and played against some sides of young 7-8-year-old boys where the opposition refused to play against her because she was a girl. So I ended up being the president of that club, and within a couple of years we had 7 all-girls teams. And some of those girls I coached this year, and they were minor premiers, undefeated, and premiers are still loving it 20 years later. Then I went to Southern Shire Association, and also very similar, not a lot of young girls playing the game at that point in time. And the reason that they gave, a lot of them, was because it clashed with netball, and netball was playing Saturdays, and our young juniors were playing Saturdays and the seniors played Sundays. So I went and met with the president of netball at the time and said, well, how about if you guys stay on Saturday, we'll move our girls to Sunday and give them the opportunity. So all of a sudden we're sort of in a position now where there's more than 4,000 girls playing in the Southern Shire. In fact, more girls playing football, soccer in Southern Shire than there is playing netball. And netball is the greatest participant sport of Southern Shire, is the biggest of all the netballs. And I think when you come to a job like mine, nearly the first thing that I did when I got my business cards which said head of the Hyundai A-League was send them back and said they need to say head of the Hyundai A-League and the Westfield W.
That's a mistake I made when I introduced you. There you go.
So
difficult to shift, isn't it?
You got to make those statements, right? And when it comes to the broadcast this year, what we've decided to do is to really not say, yeah, that's acceptable to Fox, to your employer, and to others, to say that we will cover one W League game. So this year there will be twice as many W League games broadcast. And we'll bring W League to Friday night for the first time ever. And we've also negotiated with Fox as well that at least one game per weekend will be streamed in front of the paywall, which means that anywhere right around the world you'll be able to watch one W League game a week free via your phone or your app or whatever the case may be. But in addition to that, we've now gone back to free-to-air to ABC, to SBS, and even to some of the commercial TVs to see whether or not, like you are doing with Channel 10, in the A-League, cutting a A-League game into a Channel 10 free-to-air Saturday night to try and see whether or not we can do the same with W League. So it's not just about saying, yeah, this is a great opportunity for women, let's do it. I think it's about what opportunities can we create for women. Unfortunately, you know, there's still, as you say, 5 guys sitting here in suits with an overland standing there doing the presentation. But unless the 5 of us, 6 of us, including yourself, Simon, are actually those champions, then this is the way it will be seen for a long time to come, right? I think our sign of success would be that within a couple of years, there's 5 brilliant female administrators sitting up here with your wife hosting instead of us.
She would have been anyway had she been around. But John, thanks, Greg. John, you're perhaps uniquely qualified in this panel in Clubland, at least, that you were around in the A-League when it first started with the Newcastle Jets back in those days. So you've seen the evolution of the women's game, the W League, right from the off. I'm interested to know how things have changed and how rapidly they've changed in that space since you first became involved with initially the Jets in the A-League.
Well, firstly, one thing that hasn't changed, that I send back my business card because I spelled my surname always wrong.
Who would do a Sats would start with a T?
Yeah.
At least we didn't call you Tsatsimas this time. I've heard that
I'm
before.
sure that's what Patsy Pat did Metropolis. Yeah, that was a different time and a different era, and it was interesting to note that, you know, that there was, you know, it was a changing of the landscape. But, you know, we had the A-League, and there was a lot of conditioning about, you know, you have to get the A-League right, get the A-League right. And a lot of the owners, you know, and it's still, I think you touched on it before, certainly were reticent to join in on supporting the augmentation of the women's game in the professional sphere, and it certainly was a frustrating point of view. I mean, what it was then was, let's get the numbers right, get the figures right, business, the sustainability of the business. But, you know, as it's evolved, if you're just focusing on the numbers and expecting the women's game to be a viable business proposition first and look at the numbers first, then you got it all wrong. And that's, time has shown us that. You need to do the right thing in terms of women's sport, and the rest will follow. We have every belief that change is followed. But in the early days, especially, particularly at Newcastle, and Catherine's been there, played there, it was the member federation had to support the team. I think most of the teams were like that, and it's only been the last couple of years where everyone's got on board. It's certainly a frustrating time because you know, as much as we wanted to do things, or we wanted to do things better, we could never do them, and there was not that support and that push and that public feel of this cannot be acceptable anymore. And it doesn't only extend over to football at the moment. We've seen the current climate be a variety of subjects in this sphere that need to be addressed, that have been hidden before. But certainly it was a frustrating time. The conditions in terms of women playing, even with member federations, for all their assistance, was pretty much a joke. And there was a lot of tokenism at the time. And certainly we needed to change the way not only the people viewed the W League or the elite level of professional women's sport or football in this country, but also the way the owners saw it. And I think once you got the owners started to change their idea as to where this sits in the pantheon of Australian football, then you start to have exponential wins. And once they started happening, and 1 or 2 clubs started joining in, then the 3rd and 4th goes, hey, well, you know, awaken the beast sort of thing. And we're proud to say that we've reached a moment, particularly in the last few days, where we've announced something that, in terms of the CBA, that, you know, wasn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye at the time. So, come a long way. A lot of frustrating times, particularly for the females, and but certainly we're at a point now, but we don't want to.
Danny, as you mentioned, you worked overseas, you worked in Europe and the US for the best part of 13, 14 years. I was interested, it just picked my ears, sort of pricked up when you said, you know, the USA is not there yet in terms of their women's football or soccer, as they still call it over there. That's interesting, I think, for an Australian audience, because we tend to view football in America as being the gods or the goddesses at the female game. In what sense have they not quite got it right yet, and what can perhaps we learn from that experience?
I think it's simple. When you look at the way we've embraced it here, and you look at the differences in the US, they've got college sports, right? College sports plays a huge role in female sports in the country. So I think that's the benefit they've got, that there is a pathway through education that gets females playing competitive soccer at a high level. We don't have that here, but I think what I've seen coming back, and then looking back at what I saw over there, is that they're still not at the same table. And I think one of the things that I saw with fresh eyes coming into the Sydney FC role, I went to my first board meeting the other day, which was interesting, and Kelly Cross came in to present about our academy program, and I thought, fantastic, what a great program. And I said, where's the women's program? Where's the girls program? And there was definitely silence in the board meeting, and I said, that's crazy. How can we take the women's game seriously if we're not taking the girls seriously at an academy level? And we debated it at the board meeting, and it was something that I felt really strongly about, that if we're going to be serious about the W League, we're going to be serious about the girls as well. So we want to be the first A-League club to put, or a W League club, for want of a better term, I think, to put a girls' academy in place. And I'd hope that John and other A-League clubs would support their W League teams with the same level of academy support. They don't do that in the US, and I think that's an opportunity we've got. I also look at it commercially. I looked at the P&L, and they went through the P&L, and I said there's the A-League P&L, and then there's the cost centres, and the W League was a cost centre. I said, well, why is that? Because they drive membership, they drive attendance, they drive sponsorship, all the revenue lines that the A-League drives, the W League impact as well, and they're going to continue to impact at a much greater level than they have in the past. We have to treat it like a genuine A-League experience, and I think it's just simple things like that that for years you take for granted it being on the male side of things, and then when you stop and you think, are we serious about W League as being a genuine contributor to the growth of our club? And when I look around my daughter's playing fields on Sundays and see thousands of girls running around, and I see the boys playing on the Saturday, and thousands of boys running around, as Greg touched on, they're the future of our club, both genders. So we need to treat them both the same way, and I think it starts just with really simple things, and we're committed to doing it, so it's exciting times ahead for us in the academy sense.
It's fascinating stuff, and great news to hear that you want a W League academy. That's fantastic for girls. Falvs, I want to ask you about the 4-year strategy that the FFA put out in the public sphere. I think it was it 2016? Was it last year? To be a leader for females. Each pillar sort of addresses the issues from a different point of view: participation, providing girls-only grassroots programs, redirecting of resources towards Matildas and women's pathways. How far down that process are you as we sit today?
I think there's been progress made in all quarters. If you look across those 4 different pillars, the leading pillar was all about leading the game to a unity of purpose. I mean, the CBA announced earlier this week is the most tangible example of the game coming together to effect the kind of change that will provide, will attract a higher calibre of athlete and player to the W League. That's part also of building the entertainment, which is another pillar, the entertainment value of the A League and the W League in its own right. Apart from having a marketing campaign that effectively merges the A League and the W League together, the opportunity that is presented through that investment is to attract a whole new audience to the A League and the W League. So the push behind the A League's marketing strategy, or the shift rather, is away from a young male skew, which has really punctuated the A League up until this point, to a broader family demographic. And there's a role that the W League can play in helping to break that new territory. And so I think we'll see that in the upcoming marketing campaign. Emma touched earlier on the participation pillar as well, which is all about improving the service levels of grassroots participants in the game. How we thread gender through that is to make sure that we're being specific to what it is that girls want or need in order to better enjoy their experience in the game. And that in turn will lead to growth as well. It's not just a question of improving experience, it's also about reducing churn. And I think we haven't seen huge changes in churn rates over the years. hopefully, now that we're starting to affect certain changes that are targeted at experience, we might start to see some movement in that on that KPI. And ultimately, it becomes that virtuous circle. That's more potential fans for the A League and W League, more eyeballs on the A League and the W League will lead to more dollars, more talent ultimately making its way to the national teams, which is the final pillar, which is the winning pillar. And that has also been a conscious decision to invest more in the Matildas and provide more high-level opportunities and more visible opportunities. So, before Brazil this weekend, there really haven't been too many opportunities for the Matildas to play quality opposition on home soil. If we face the facts, we had New Zealand in the run-up to the Rio Olympics. Before that, we had Vietnam in the run-up to the Women's World Cup, and not a great deal on home soil. And that's just a huge missed opportunity. If you look at all the interest that's been garnered, all the media interest that's been garnered from the Matildas playing a quality opponent like Brazil, that's priceless. I mean, it's very difficult to capture that level of media interest otherwise. So I think it's all starting to come together. Within the organisation, there's a whole host of cultural change that we're starting to affect. We're measuring the gender gap in terms of management, board, at all different levels of the organisation, coaching, and we're slowly putting in place measures to bring it more into line.
Just pick up on that, Peter, about your words a few moments ago about developing talent. You talked about Katie Gill and talked about it, being potentially a future CEO. As things stand, and I'm not pointing an accusatory finger just purely at Football New South Wales, but Jeanette Jones, who's on one of our earlier panels, she's the only female board member at the moment of Football New South Wales. Is there a plan to get greater female representation and develop better female sports administrators at the state body?
Absolutely. I think in terms of the board, that clearly is up to the board and the members, but I think it'd be fair to say that there's certainly desired recognition, and I think there's a vacancy currently. I think they're looking to address that at the management level. Is that it's not satisfactory when I look around what we call Exco, and there's no females there, and so that needs to be addressed. But when the opportunity came up a couple of months ago, we had no hesitation in engaging and employing one of Australia's best female football administrators, Jo Fernandez, and even our intention and desires of doing more of these sorts of workshops underlines our strategy and desire to do more work in this area. And it was pleasing to, the likes of Linda, Anne-Marie, Denise, others in the room that have attended this and are forging their way out in association and clubland. We have some others that are tremendous. Sharon Egger was mentioned earlier as a TD, Lee Wardell as Northwest Women's, and so on. So I think one of the things that has increasingly said, we're pleased with where we are, but there's so much more to do. And I think the thing that I'm continually hitting home to me over the last couple of days is we only win if we all win, and we can't afford to leave everyone behind. And this is an area that there's so much more work to do. And so, we've got an NPL tonight, as you know, Matilda's match, but we start work on Monday to take whatever has come out of this to start making some changes and act on some of the things that we can do.
Okay, my last question is going to be to Greg. Now I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions. I'm sure you listened with interest, as I did, to Chris Nunn's presentation about the various numbers around females in football, or females who watch football. It seems as though we're winning in the battle to call our sport football overall, but the numbers are skewed towards the men in that regard. And in terms of the numbers of women that watch the A-League, probably watch the W League as well, we're not quite where we need to be, are we? How do we change those figures and convert more women into being not just players, coaches, administrators of the game, but also fans of the game?
I think there needs to be quite a subtle change, and I had sort of a bit of a sliding doors moment with my corporate career before I came into football as a full-time employee. Also had been the chair of Football New South Wales for 4 years. So this job is the first time that I actually got paid to do it. But in the past, I worked for an organisation that's one of the biggest corporations in the world, PepsiCo, who owned not just the beverage business, but in Australia, the snack food business. And around the world, that's the Lay's business in the States and the Walker's business in the UK, etc. They made a very subtle change in their marketing and talk-to philosophy, which I think is really relevant in football. They had a lot of data about the consumer, a lot of data about who ate their products, who drank their product, what flavours they wanted, what bag sizes they wanted. But it wasn't until they realised that the consumer, in 80% of the cases, was not the decision maker. That the decision maker was the mum. The decision maker was the mother who, at that time, before online I suppose, was pushing the trolley down into the shopping centre and making the choice about what their partner or their child would be doing. When they started to target the decision maker, then everything went north. The fact is that company has been led for the last 10 years by a woman. One of the most influential businesswomen in the current decade, where, PepsiCo is a $70 billion turnover worldwide, run by a woman, and she just changed the lens. Not to a gender thing, not to let's take it away from the men to the women, whatever. What she said was, who are the decision makers? Who are the decision makers in the supermarket? Who are the decision makers in the impulse market that choose that stuff? I think that's so relevant to our game, because we've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy wondering about the size of our association, the size of our club. How many boys have we got playing? How many girls have we got playing? How many men have we got playing? How many senior women have we got playing? And forgotten to a large degree that when that child is 5 or 6, the decision maker about who they play for, what code they play for, how many codes they play for, is primarily the mother. And I think this is where we spent a lot of time on dad takes the kids to the football. And when we look at the AFL, mum and dad take the kids to the football. So I think we just got to do actually what I've lived for the last 10 years, and that is say, yes, all that data is important in respect of participation and the segmentation of our participants, but actually maybe more important to grow against the numbers that we saw from the Futures organisation is how do we tap into the decision maker? How do we tap into the mother that makes that decision that could in fact, for a participant or for share of wallet, share of purse, share of Saturday night entertainment, is the person that's going to make the decision to grow those numbers. And I think that's a very subtle change that we've got to make.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Hands up please, who's got questions for Al?
Very encouraging to hear about some of the initiatives that you've all been involved in and some of the questions that you're asking. But how many of you have KPIs placed for yourselves and also your team around gender, and what sort of timeframes are encompassed in those KPIs?
Well, I might pick that one up. We don't necessarily have specific KPIs. What we need to, and what we come in place on, we need to get things better. We need to do things as best as we possibly can. To set unrealistic KPIs or just put numbers in there doesn't work for us. But what we do is try to make things better, make things different. We just instituted a program called the Lovely Mentoring Program, and what we found was there were a lot of women in business programs, a lot of match day congregations that you'll just go to a bar, have a drink, and say, here we're women in business congregate. So it's all about doing things better. What are we specifically? What's the outcome that we want to get here, rather than focus on KPIs? And what we wanted to do in that and say, we want to do something different. We don't want to do a women in business program that says, here you go, Wanderers have got a women as a business program, a bit like the AFL, a bit like the NRL, and it's pretty much the same thing. What we did, we instituted a program where every one of our WE players has a mentor assigned to them. That assignment involves mentoring them personally as to their personal brand, as to money management, and the people that are involved in this program are highly respected women, not necessarily in sport. It's in business, it's a raft, and they come from all over Australia. Huggy's one of them now, but they've come from all over Australia to support this. And we want to set specific outcomes that objectives that come out and are sustainable and are tangible outcomes. And what's happened is this has been nothing short of successful at this point in time. We only needed 22 mentors. We had an application for 72. We couldn't find room for all other 72, but we will involve those women that have indicated, and those women and men who indicated they want to be mentors to these players in some form or fashion, to bring them together. So collectively, then we group as a collective and say, now what can you bring to the table that we can do better here? We've started this program, but we're doing it with Western Sydney, with our university, and we're doing it with NRMA. Okay, they're two partners. They've brought something to the table with us. Now, all those other mentors can add something to that we can't see, or can come up with a great idea. They're all very educated, very smart people. So that's an example of, that's not a KPI. We don't know where this might lead to, but it'll lead to something better.
Thanks, John. I might just add on that if I can, right? Similar in some parts to what JT said about not having specific KPIs to myself. The one that I always would live by, and probably grown up in my last corporate 10 years, is visible leadership of this agenda. To actually have a set of KPIs and to tick that, for me, is not where I want to be. So when those opportunities arrive and you're in a meeting or conversation around broadcast, you need to be visible about your passion and want for gender equality in respect of, say, the broadcast, right? When the opportunity came for me to join Emma and Walshy and Kate in the CBA agreements, I was there in every single meeting to attend that. When they have the press conference to announce that, I'm not at the table, because that's actually time for our female leaders to shine, not for guys in suits to sit up there and start talking about women's leaders. But I'm in the room, but I'm down the back. I know hand in hand with Emma and Walshy and Kate, we've all done the job. So that's the sort of visible leadership we do. The other thing is just consistency. When we put out our metrics around A-League, we put out our metrics around W-League. When we talk about A-League, whether it's my business card, it's A-League, W-League, every letter I sign, every email footer has A-League, W-League. It's this visible leadership of the agenda I think is most important. Because if you're a male with a set of KPIs in your top left-hand drawer and you think you're done, you haven't started.
I'm actually, to Simon actually, I am the only woman on Football New South Wales board. I've been through several elections over the 6 years I've been on board. In that time, not one other woman has put a hand up to be nominated for Football New South Wales. I think it's disturbing for women that we do not put our hand up to be elected to these positions, and we have to rely on men to appoint women to boards to get that gender equity. And it's about time, I think, we as women whinge a lot, and we actually have to put our hand up and actually do it as well, though. That's all.
Any comments on that? No?
Can I just follow up on Jeanette's point and ask the comments of the panel? I agree with Jeanette, and I've got a lot of history there. I've worked in affirmative action in government since the 1980s, but now I'm the father of two daughters. I've got a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, both heavily involved in this sport. But if I look at more my 14-year-old at school, I want to know what sort of leadership, what sort of mentoring she gets. So when she gets into her 20s, she puts her hand up to be on a committee. She puts her hand up, which is what I did, and I started way back when, as a person at school, put my hand up to be on this. How do you as the men's in suits help the next generation for the generational change, so we don't have the same thing happening with the girls that are coming through?
I think that's a really good point. I think it's really important that we help build that capacity and that self-belief, if that's one of the things that's also lacking. One of the initiatives that was put in place at FFA was for the senior executive to act as mentors for a number of up-and-coming young female administrators around the country. I mentor an excellent administrator from Northern New South Wales Football. We had a workshop, it was just last year, that lasted a couple of days, quite intensive, a couple of days where we really came to understand, many of us were meeting for the first time, but we came to understand one another's backstories, and I'm in contact with my mentee on a monthly basis, talking, sharing experiences, hearing about how her professional journey is progressing. I'll spend some time with her face-to-face on Tuesday when I'm in Newcastle. But I think it's also, and so that's happening, and that's where tangibly the senior executive of FFA has consciously made this decision to invest in the next generation. I think we've also conducted our own audit to understand how we stack up at different levels of the organisation in terms of the gender split. Because if we don't track it and if we don't see it, we may never act on it. So I think KPIs are important and are relevant and do provide important guidance and highlight where there are issues and how successful our initiatives are at addressing them. And I think it's also, as I say, it's also a matter of culture within any organisation to consciously decide to invest in the women's game as opposed to continue perhaps the way things have been done in the past. We as an executive, in preparing our budget for the forthcoming year, made decisions around how we allocate resources to national teams, for example. We chose to divert more resources towards the Matildas because we could see that their calendar just didn't stack up. It didn't make sense that we weren't providing the same opportunities on home soil for the Matildas as we did for the Socceroos in recent years. And it's not just about the opportunity. It's also about the business sense behind it, because it's a huge opportunity commercially. But how can we ever breathe life into if we don't make that investment? So all these things converging, I think, are what ultimately will lead to change and these opportunities presenting for the next generation.
I think the culture is key, isn't it, amongst all organisations, particularly ones that do tend to be heavily dominated by men. I know that, in the media industry, which I work in, I've been mentoring two females, Brianna Holden, who's now working at Fox Sports, and Louise Taffer, who's just got a job with a new 24-hour football radio station, which is about to start, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, when it does come to selecting females for jobs, certainly in my industry, a lot of them are still selected on look as much as ability. And that's culture in my industry. Any other questions?
Coming from a grassroots club, I've seen the tremendous benefit of having grassroots girls interacting with Matildas and W League players this season. One of the challenges we find is the winter season when the girls are playing and most focus on football is 6 months out of alignment with a very short W League season. Quite often when at club level I'm wanting to do the most promotion and try and engage to get appearances from W League players, it's the contract finishes on grand final day, and then those that have the opportunities to go overseas, they're gone. What are ways that we can work to try and do this? I know it's commercial difficulties and contracts and finances and so on, but how do we bridge the gap between that direct, like we saw at Penrith last night, the looks on those faces? I know the looks on my girls at Rosalie when they had Kaya come and visit and Ellie Carpenter come and visit, it just blew you away. How do we overcome those hurdles of calendars and schedules and
Well, just based on experience, Danny, I'll and Sydney will be the same scenario. We have a problem where the season is too short. We all know it's too short, and everyone in the room, particularly in sort of terms of the PFA, the FFA, and the clubs, know that the season has to get longer. I think a lot of this problem will be alleviated when the season is elongated. But right now, it is a problem because a lot of those players play overseas, or they play elsewhere, or they have other commitments. So once we now, particularly with the new CBAs coming in, it's probably laid a significant step in terms of, okay, we're talking about pay, we're talking about conditions, we're talking about... The next one is, how do we get a respected competition? A competition where girls do not have to go overseas to apply their trade, to earn extra money, to get the kudos they deserve, but they are recognised here in their home country. They're able to play with the national team and train with the national team here, which Staj has them when he needs them. So it'll become more of a Club Australia here rather than go overseas. Once you have that and you have the remuneration that justifies the ability of those girls to stay here, then the season becomes longer, more partners will come on board, and then it becomes a situation where the contract is extended, and then you've got a program in place where everyone can work in synergy. It is a problem, it has been a problem for a while, but it's not only a problem that's unique only to the W League. We have a long season in the A-League as well, and that problem is replicated in the A-League model as well. So once we get to a step where the registration periods for junior clubs matches when the W League is here, then that'll go a long way to alleviate the problem that you refer to.
I think the other thing is that not all W League players go overseas, and a number of associations have engaged home-based W League players who make up the roster. I think Hill's Association have got young Olivia Price. I'm sure there are others. Catherine Connolly is out in, again, another association, etc. And I think Chris mentioned that their Manly United Women's NPL, I think, have also a responsibility and a commitment to go down and help the girls SAT program, etc. So I think I think it was Jeanette who also mentioned about broadening the base. We can also broaden the heroes as well, that they don't always have to be Matildas or W League players themselves, but they can also be our women's NPL players, because it's all about providing role models of aspiring or aspirational opportunities at the local community to say, oh, well, I'm going to adopt it. There's no reason why an NPL women's player can't adopt a club or adopt a team, and I'm sure many do that and do some wonderful things in that area.
Probably got time for 2 more questions. Hello, Emma.
I've had the pleasure of working with most of these guys, and I can attest to the fact that they are male champions of change, and perhaps we should set up an official male champions of change in football, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Danny, coming on board at Sydney FC. I'd like a bit of a visionary kind of view from each of you around, let's jump ahead to 10 years' time. What do you think the game's going to look like for women in football, either at W League, Matildas level, grassroots? What would be your vision? Sorry.
I'll let I start, because I'm the newest, so I can probably say the wrong thing. But maybe in 10 years from now that we're sitting here in a room full of men and they're all complaining they're not getting a fair go. No, I think on a serious note, the trajectory that the women's game on is clear to see, and I think as sort of male influences in that regard, we've all said and act on what we're saying around contributing to that. I think if we can see the attendance levels at the W League games being up there with the A League, I think we can see with the initiative the FFA have put in place around the double headers is fantastic. Bringing the female game up onto the playing field of the men is the first step. And we're, as a club, really excited about the double headers. Having the girls play at Allianz before the men is the fat first step. But I think in 10 years from now, if we can be making decisions on whether we play the men first or the female first, that would be a really interesting dynamic and one that we should all be proud of if we get there. So, yeah, there's lots of things that could happen over that time, but I think the trajectory that we're on is really important, and we need to keep that momentum. And that's partly where we come into play up here.
Last year, as you know, we lost a great trailblazer to the game in Heather Reid, who is no longer a CEO but a member fed. We look across 9 member feds, I think they're all male, the CEOs. I think that needs to change. I think if, again, we look across the A-League, W-League club scenario, they're all males. That needs to change. I'd like to see a female at the centre of an A-League match as a referee. Again, embarrass Katie, but moving on from the PFA and as I said, I think she is a potential CEO of either a club or a member fed. And then there's no reason why we can't have, as we have in the male Socceroos, a Australian-born female coach until this. And so whether that's Leah Blaney, Heather Garriock, or any of the other young coaches coming through as part of your mentoring program, female CEO of an A-League club, female CEO of a member federation, a female in the centre as a referee as an A-League match, and a female Australian coach. That would be my KPIs to tick off for.
Thanks, Em, for the loaded question. Our strategies are due in a couple of weeks, so yeah, no problems. Look, I think without sort of pushing it past reality, my vision for the game would actually be more a vision for sport in Australia. And the first thing would be to ensure that there is actual physical participation still as the primary way that we consume sport, and not let it move into an e-sport world and move into a position where children are in their study or in their bedroom or in their living room playing other children from all over the world through an iPod or an iPad. I really hope it's still grass and kids run around making friendships and building communities. That would be my first thing. The second thing would be the reality that sport was really available to all. Not just gender specific, but people with disabilities, and have this broad range where sport was just part of the psyche, and we were sitting here and the labels around the wall would simply say football forum, as opposed to saying women in football forum. If that was possible in 10, 15 years' time, when we could come here and this room was full of people that love football and gender wasn't the issue, then I think we would win.
Do we have one last question? All done? Okay. Thank you very much, guys, our male champions for change.